Pursuant to Internal Revenue Service guidance, be advised that any federal tax advice contained in this program is not intended to be used, and it cannot be used by any person or entity for the purpose of avoiding any tax penalties that may be imposed by the Internal Revenue Service or any other U.S. federal taxing authority or agency, or promoting, marketing, or recommending to another party any transaction or matter addressed in this show. The opinions expressed by the host and the guests are their own and may not be used as authoritative advice. Any use of this material without the written consent of the host is strictly prohibited.
Welcome back. I am your host, Attorney Stephen Leahy, and this is the IRS Radio Hour on AM 560, The Answer.
So, Steve.
So I'm very serious now, Joe, because this is a serious part of the show.
Yes. We are talking to Attorney Stephen Leahy, and we are going to read a question from our friend, Dr. Richard Fader.
So that's the name of the segment now, is Dr. Fader has a question.
Dr. Fader of Fort Wayne, Indiana, asked this question for you, Steve. He says, the IRS has slammed me with what I feel are outrageous penalties and fees. Is there a way to reduce them? Or, preferably, eliminate them altogether? Funny, you wouldn't think he'd have a West Side accent being from Indiana. But he does.
He couldn't live in Indiana. A lot of people grew up in the West Side
and run away to Indiana.
Well, some are even going to Wisconsin now that they have a Republican governor up there who's run 3 times in the last 4 years and won.
And that's right. And my daughter Jennifer, I talked her into going up there. And excuse me, Dr. Fader, I'm going to cut into your question. She was walking by and I said, you should go vote. And she said, Dad, I'm not going to vote because you tell me to vote. And I said, don't you think that having to run 3 times for the same office in 4 years and having those guys run away and hide in Chicago and breaking their laws, don't you think that that's worth holding them to account? And she said yes.
And she voted.
And she voted. And
right. I saw the picture on her Facebook page.
Yeah.
So
God bless you, honey.
The answer to the question of Dr. Fader's question is sometimes. Okay, so this is always what people
ask. All right,
ask.
thanks. Let's move on now.
So this is what almost everybody who comes to see me, because they're going to owe the IRS money. And a big portion of what they owe is going to be penalties and interest. And they always say, well, if I could just pay what I owe, I'd be okay with that. Now, the reason why the IRS has penalties and interest
so you pay what you owe.
Is that you pay on time. The compliance, right? We always talk on the show about compliance, and that's such a big part to the IRS. And so, it's hard for me to tell my clients, but if it doesn't seem fair if I have to pay on time and then you don't pay, and then you don't pay any penalties and interest either. But the answer is that there are ways to what they call abate the penalties. And when you abate the penalties, you're abating some of the interest because interest.
Is it sometimes the fact that the IRS does your taxes or claims something on you and then charges you more, and then
that's true.
You're
that's what we talked about that. Those are called SFRs, or substitute for returns. But that's kind of a different issue, because what you do there is you redo your tax returns and you do them properly, and that might dramatically reduce what you owe. I got a feeling
Dr. Fader will be asking you a question about.
I think he did a couple of weeks ago, But anyway, so that's a different issue. Right here is, yes, I owe that much. I owe what the IRS says I owe, but now they hit me with penalties and interest. And, do I have to pay the penalties and interest? And again, oftentimes the answer is yes, but sometimes no. There's a process that the IRS has. It came in the 1998, 1996 laws when they changed.
When the Republicans took control of the House for the first time.
That's right, called abatement, and they allow you to abate those penalties. And again, if I reduce what I owe the IRS, then it's going to reduce the interest that I'm going to pay. But I'm going to pay interest on whatever I owe the IRS. Now, the first one, there's a number of ways that you can, or reasons why the IRS will agree to abate a penalty. The first one is the first time. So if I've always paid my taxes on time for the last 5 years, I've filed on time, I paid on time, then I can ask for a first-time abatement. And the first-time abatements, you say, I've always done it. I've made a mistake this time, please reduce the penalties, and they will they'll take them out.
Please.
That's right. You got to say please, otherwise they won't do it. But
and then they want your first dog.
But generally, the first time you're going to get a penalty abatement. You have to ask. They're not going to give it to you without asking. And you have to put it on the right forms, and you have to ask it properly. But if you ask, then they usually will abate for a first time. Again, if I've always filed on time, always paid on time. But then there's a list of reasonable causes. So if I could show them, and I always tell people, usually if you haven't filed for some time, there's usually a reasonable cause. Something happened that made you, maybe
it's not my fault.
Well, a lot of times it isn't, because maybe they got sick. Maybe they were divorced. Maybe their parents passed away and they went into a depression. And this happens a lot. And so what I usually ask my clients to do is, I need a narrative. Tell me why. What was going on in your life at that time and that made you miss filing? Why didn't you file? And narrative, then we can go through a lot of different what they call reasonable cause. So maybe if I made a mistake. Even if I made a mistake, sometimes they'll abate the penalties. If it's ignorance of the law, if there was a death or serious unavoidable absence, inability to obtain records, inability to obtain tax forms. So sometimes I can't get the records, and that's a reasonable cause. So there's a list of reasonable causes. Again, when we do these abatements, what we do is we go through all of them and we try to make your situation fit. So one of these will work. Now, it's a lot like a lot of these other things I talk about, is that you usually have to appeal. You're going to be denied the first time, and then you have to appeal it.
Please.
And then you have to say pretty please. That's right. So first time you say please, second time you say pretty please. But that's the appeal. And if you're going to get it, you're probably going to get it on the appeal. So that's how abatement works. But again, at least you have a way out. There is a way out, but you have to ask.
Well, and how would they know what to ask?
And you have to ask. You have to get the right people to ask for you, and that would be Open Tax Resolution and the law office of Stephen A. Leahy.
Aren't they the ones who sponsor this show?
That is the sponsor of this show. 312-664-6649. Visit our website at chicagotaxteam.com.
Like us on Facebook and Twitter us, whatever that is. See you on the other side.
Tweet.